Welcome to this explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled you're here today because, well, we're going to fundamentally dismantle how we understand logistics and inventory. If you've ever wanted to literally pull your hair out over a missing shipment or untangling a massive warehouse mess, this is for you. We're going to look right past the superficial symptoms that plague daily operations and dig straight into the structural systems that drive them. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's just jump right in. So here's a question to kick things off, and it goes against almost everything you might hear in a standard operations meeting. Why do warehouse upgrades consistently fail to fix inventory crises? Think about it. Conventional advice tells us that if we have fulfillment issues, we need faster pick and pack systems, or we need to invest in shiny, expensive new warehouse management software. But here is the structural truth. Investing in better warehousing or software is completely bankrupt if the real problem lives somewhere else entirely. You see, the conventional view essentially assumes that when customer deadlines slip or working capital gets trapped, it's a downstream warehouse inefficiency. It's an easy target, right? But the structural reality is entirely different. Inventory problems are almost always caused by upstream purchasing governance failures. What's happening is operations leaders are routinely treating the symptom downstream on the warehouse floor rather than treating the actual disease upstream in the purchasing department. To fix this, here's our clinical roadmap. We'll start with the downstream logistics illusion. Define a taxonomy of structural failure, map the upstream authority disconnect, explore demand pricing dynamics, and finally, look at conditional decision rules. Okay, Section 1, the downstream logistics illusion. Let's explore exactly why those localized fixes in the warehouse completely fail to resolve systemic supply chain friction. Consider this idea for a second. Growth does not break logistics. Growth reveals the logistics that were never designed. When a business scales, there's this pervasive assumption that the new volume is breaking the system. Actually, scratch that. That's an illusion. Scaling a business merely exposes the unformalized historical habits that were never actually engineered to handle scale in the first place. You're just finally seeing the structural cracks that were always there. The crucial takeaway here is that supply chain disruption is a symptom of invisible decision architecture, not a vendor problem. When a critical delivery is missed, the immediate, easiest reflex in the boardroom is to blame the supplier. It feels good to point the finger outward, but the root cause is rarely the vendor's failure. The real root cause is a profound lack of visibility into upstream capacity constraints by the buyer. The company is operating on unverified assumptions rather than documented systems. Moving to Section 2, Taxonomy of Structural Failure. If we want to fix a broken system, we first must explicitly name the ways it breaks down. Our first failure mode is what we call relationship inertia. This is defined as awarding critical supply contracts based on informal vendor responsiveness rather than formalized, measured performance metrics. This happens when purchasing decisions are made simply because, a vendor answers the phone quickly or has a great personality. But this failure mode creates extreme concentration risk. It masks single points of failure behind the comfort of friendly vendor interactions, leaving your entire operation vulnerable to a single, completely unmapped dependency. Then we have the second failure mode, extrapolation with optimism. This is the highly dangerous practice of forecasting future demand solely by adding a flat buffer to past habits, completely ignoring shifting market consumption patterns. The underlying mechanism here systematically creates bias. A spreadsheet that's decoupled from actual consumption velocity leads an organization to perpetually over-forecast slow movers and under-forecast fast movers. It literally guarantees an inventory mismatch. And our third failure mode is the authority disconnect. This represents the complete absence of an assigned protocol or designated owner for identifying and liquidating obsolete inventory. This missing governance ensures that dead stock accumulates silently. Working capital becomes trapped simply because nobody in the organization possesses the explicit trigger to stop the accumulation and force a liquidation. Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, the upstream authority disconnect. Let's see how these failures actually play out in daily operations. Let's trace this causal chain step by step. Step 1. Unformalized intuition triggers a buy. Someone relies on a gut feeling rather than a data-driven reorder point. Step 2, market demand shifts, as it inevitably always does. Step 3 is where the structural failure fully kicks in. No liquidation authority exists. Because no one is assigned the threshold to clear that inventory, we hit Step 4, dead stock anchors your working capital. This maps exactly why the failure occurs systematically, rather than just observing that it happens. Bringing this back to your daily reality, True inventory management absolutely requires installing decision architecture where none exists right now. Solving this dysfunction demands documenting exactly who decides, when they decide, and what observable, measurable trigger forces that decision. You've got to remove the guesswork entirely and replace it with a rigid, documented protocol. All right, Section 4, Dynamics of Demand Pricing. Now, let's shift our focus outward to see how external pricing strategies interact with these structural constraints. This distinction separates a strategy that leaves hidden revenue on the table from one that captures maximum value. Cost-plus pricing is incredibly inward-looking and rigid. It completely misses external market signals because it only cares about internal production costs. Demand-based pricing, on the other hand, is outward-looking. It acts as a dynamic response to perceived value elasticity. It shifts based on what the consumer is willing to tolerate, adapting seamlessly to market fluctuations in real time. This brings us to a really powerful concept. When prices are aligned to perceived value, hidden revenue can be unlocked. Utilizing demand-based pricing protects against margin compression, and more importantly, it does this without dragging a business into a destructive, race-to-the-bottom price war with competitors. You're pricing based on the unique value you provide, not merely the cost you incur to produce it. Finally, Section 5, Conditional Decision Rules. I promise to equip you with concrete, absolute rules you can apply immediately to fix these gaps. Here are your operational non-negotiables. First, if a critical SKU is single-sourced through a friendly handshake, you absolutely must require a formalized written escalation protocol. Second, if a SKU exhibits zero movement across a full demand cycle, transfer liquidation authority immediately to operations. Don't wait for a crisis. Act on the trigger. Third, if competitor pricing drops aggressively without a change in their product, analyze their market share motives before blindly matching them. Replacing guesswork with these rigid if-then protocols prevents operational panic during market fluctuations. Ultimately, you've got to replace heroic operational firefighting with repeatable, documented systems. The core difference between a stalling operation and a scaling one is the willingness to map dependencies and rely on data-driven triggers rather than just crossing your fingers and relying on an individual's intuition, memory, or stress tolerance. I want to leave you with this final, slightly provocative thought. Is your supply chain a carefully designed strategic asset, or is it just a series of unverified purchasing habits waiting to fail? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I highly encourage you to take these frameworks, look closely at your own operations, and fundamentally rethink your internal decision architecture.